Hi everybody, it's Natalie from Not Christmas Autism Girl. Welcome back to my channel. So, I got a request from my friend Eliza to make a Star Wars Rebels video, my opinion on Star Wars Rebels, and why everybody should watch it, so that's what I'm going to do. I made a review of Star Wars video a while ago. If you haven't watched it, you should watch it. But this is going a little more detail into Star Wars Rebels itself, and not just Star Wars in general. So, I'm going to have a spoiler-free section and then a spoiler section. So if you haven't seen the show, watch the spoiler-free section and then don't watch the spoiler section. Or if you want to see the spoiler, it's up to you. Obviously, we're just putting a spoiler warning toward the middle of the video. I'm just going to say spoiler warning from here on out. Anyway, let's get started. So, Star Wars Rebels takes place in between episodes, in between the prequels and the first of the original trilogy. It takes place 14 years after Revenge of the Sith, and it ends the same year as Rogue One and A New Hope. So in Star Wars, they timeline things based on the Battle of Yavin, the Battle of the first Death Star. And so it's 5 years before the Battle of Yavin, and 0 before the Battle of Yavin. And then everything post episode 4 is ABY, or after the Battle of Yavin. So it's like R0 in modern times. I'm not sure what really was the deciding point for 0 in our timeline, because they said when they did AD and BC, it didn't really work out, but whatever. Anyway, so let's just move on. So that's that timeline. So there are 6 major characters in the Rebels. So you have Ezra, who's introduced as the street orphan who discovers he is force sensitive when he opens a holocron, and he's taken under the wing of Kanan, a former Padawan who survived Order 66 and hides his identity as a Jedi until he revealed it. So, you have Hera, the Twi'lek pilot. She's the daughter of Cham Syndulla, the freedom fighter from Star Wars The Clone Wars. She's motherly and wonderful. She's my favorite character, actually, in Rebels. And my third favorite character in Star Wars in general, after Ahsoka and Jen, as you know if you've seen my Star Wars video. And then you have Sabine, the Mandalorian warrior, who's also a graffiti artist and a mechanic. And an artist and a mechanic, and she also knows a lot about weapons, and she gets excited about different things. She forms a bond with Ezra. Not a romantic bond, they're brother and sister, but whatever. People still try to say they should be a couple, but they really shouldn't. Then you have Zeb, and they're called the Spectres, and they make up the Ghost crew, because the ship is called the Ghost, because that's its signature. So, then you have Zeb, who's a Lasat warrior. It's one of the last surviving members of the Lasat race, who was decimated, whose homeworld was decimated and genocided by the Empire prior to the event of the series. Then you have Chopper, who's the C-1 astromech droid. He's like the cat of the family. He's really funny. They're like a family because they pretty much lost their families to the Empire, and so it's all about makeshift family. They expand the mythology of Star Wars, especially in Season 4. They expand the mythology of the Force without making it ridiculous. And it gets better with each season. So you have Season 4 is the best, and Season 3, then Season 2, then Season 1. But they're all so good. But if you watched Season 1, and you were like, oh, this is a kid's show, don't give up on it. It gets really, really good. You just gotta be a little more patient. You can't just judge a whole series off the first episode. And then, so So they brought back so many iconic characters. How is this? So it also deals with things like sacrifice and heroism, found family, like I said, and just different things that, and the forming of the rebellion is so cool to watch, like how it started and how it formed. So that's the spoiler-free section. We're getting into the spoiler section now. So I'm going to summarize season 1. So season 1 opens with Ezra eventually joining the Ghost Crew, and they're hunted by the Agent Callus and the Grand Inquisitor, who you might have seen if you watch Obi-Wan Kenobi. And he is hunting them because they discover Kanan's a Jedi. Well, a Jedi Padawan, but he survived Order 66, and so basically they're being hunted. But then at one point, it's discovered Ezra was born on Empire Day. All they know at this point is that Ezra lost his parents. What we don't know, they broadcasted messages against the Empire, and they got arrested for it, and they took us home. And so Ezra's been hardened over the years. He doesn't trust people easily, and he grew up alone on the streets. So he lost them when he was 7, and now he's 15. And so he was born on the day that the Empire was founded. So Empire Day is very emotional for him. And so Kanan teaches Ezra to connect with creatures by letting go of submitting his fears. But he taps into the dark side accidentally because he gets overwhelmed by fear and anger. And so he ends up passing out, and that was a traumatic experience for him. But then Kanan takes him to the Jedi. And all we know is they don't really know if there are any other rebels out there. All they know is that they're fighting on this planet called Lothal. And so basically on Lothal there's this Jedi temple. And he takes them there, and he's taken, and Ezra passes some test about his fears. And he meets a disembodied voice of Yoda, who tests him on why he wants to become a Jedi. He says he wants to protect people. And so he's taken into this place with stars. We don't really know what this place is at this point, but we find out later. With a bunch of stars and a map. And so he gives Ezra a kyber crystal to build his lightsaber with. So he built this lightsaber blaster hybrid that can stun. And so eventually they decide they're going to broadcast a message to bring people hope. So then they take over an Imperial Tower, and then Kanan's captured, and then they rescue him by revealing some information to one of their sources, Vizago, that he's a Jedi, and Ezra now owes him a favor. And so basically they find out where Kanan is, they rescue him with the help of a bunch of other rebels that they just find out now exist, and Ahsoka shows up, and she's revealed to be Fulcrum, the source of intel between the rebels. Ahsoka is in a Clone Wars. You know who Ahsoka is if you're watching this video, probably, because she's a fan favorite in Clone Wars, and she was in The Mandalorian. So at this point, I hope you know who Ahsoka is. So anyway, but she was, if you don't, she was Anakin Skywalker's apprentice in the Clone Wars, who left the Jedi Order and led the siege of Mandalore, survived Order 66, and went into hiding. So here she's back now as an adult. She was a teenager in the Clone Wars. So that's season 1. Now season 2, we meet Darth Vader shows up, along with Tarkin brings Darth Vader along. And so they need a base. So they temporarily find this place called Gorel, thanks to the help of Clone Rex that Kanan has to deal with some animosity towards. Eventually, he and Kanan become friends. They discover on this mission while the Empire is testing this ship that can pull ships out of hyperspace. And so in the season, they're finding these two Inquisitors and Vader, and so eventually they go to back to the Jedi Temple, and Ahsoka reveals she left the Order to Ezra, and then they open it up, and then Ezra meets Yoda again in the same place, and he tells him it's important to know how you choose to win. But Ezra's insistent they're going to fight, so Yoda tells them to find Malachor. So that's that, and then meanwhile, Kanan meets a temple guard who tells him that Ezra's going to will be consumed by the dark side because it calls to him right now. And so Kanan fights, and eventually he surrenders as he admits he can't protect Ezra forever, and he's going to train him the best he can. And so he's knighted, because that's what took Luke to become a Jedi. Just like Luke, who by surrendering, by refusing to fight, is when he really became a Jedi. So after that, during that, they all receive rapid visions. Ahsoka realizes Anakin became Darth Vader, and she's in anguish. So they're told to find Malachor, which is a Sith planet, and so eventually they find a real base. Ezra discovers his parents are dead. They got killed in a prison break, and he meets the former governor of Lothal, Ryder Zadi, who becomes important later. And then Ezra ends up so then they get to Malachor. Ezra gets separated from the group. He meets Maul, who introduces him to the Sith ways, including a Sith holocron. At first, he's not going to activate it, but then there might be a way when he ascends the temple. Well, it's causing some division between him and Kanan, because both Ahsoka and Kanan don't trust Darth Maul, but Ezra does, especially when Maul revealed what the Sith had done to him. And so Ezra relates to this, as he wants justice for it. And so basically, he wants to destroy the Sith, and so Ezra ends up descending to the temple, where all the Inquisitors end up getting killed. Then he activates the temple and realizes that Maul tricked him, that he wants to use it to wipe out his enemies. Meanwhile, Maul reveals he wants to make Ezra his apprentice. He blinds Kanan, and then Ahsoka saves Kanan, and they fight, and then Maul falls off and escapes. And then Ahsoka shows up to defend Ezra, as Vader shows up. And so eventually Ezra, and we're introduced to the best scene in Rebels where Ahsoka and Vader fight. We were waiting for 10 stinking years for this. And so basically they fight, and so they end up, so Ahsoka's fate is left ambiguous, but all we know is that Vader escapes, and so does Maul. So the planet blows up, but Ezra still has the Sith holocron, and Kanan is now blinded. So in season 3, Ezra's still been using the Sith holocron, where he has met Hondo at this point, where they become friends. And so Hondo gives information to this base where they can use attack, and he's supposed to do a recon mission, but he ends up disobeying orders, and so he gets removed from his promotion that he just got, and he gets in trouble, but then Kanan comes back and saves him. So we're backtracking to Kanan, where Kanan's been distancing himself from the Force for 6 months, and he meets this giant creature called Bendu, who's in the middle of the dark and the light side of the Force. He's neutral, so he teaches Kanan how to see through the Force, where his eyesight will never be restored, as far as we know, but he can at least sense and see things through the Force. So he connects with the spiders, something Ezra, despite all his talents, was never able to do. And so in season 2, we are also introduced to these creatures that can attack ships and they can jump through hyperspace, called the Purgo. And then that happens, and then the next episode he gives the Sith holocron to the Bendu. They have to get it back, and then Maul and Ezra end up joining the Jedi and Sith holocrons to get some information. Ezra wants to destroy the Sith, but Maul wants hope, and so Ezra ends the vision. And so the information gets mixed up, and he ends up linking their minds. So then they end up discovering that Zeb had bonded with Kallus, an agent of the Empire, on this planet, and Kallus was a new fulcrum post-Ahsoka. And we also introduced a Saw Gerrera, where we discovered that Geonosis was genocided too, except for one, Geonosian and the Queen Egg. And Saw Gerrera is revealed to be an extremist. And then we're also introduced to more to Sabine's past. Fast forward a few episodes, Ezra starts seeing Maul on Atollon, and so that's where the base is. And so he ends up going to Dathomir with Maul, who threatens to reveal their base. And so they rejoin their minds, and then Ezra discovers that Obi-Wan Kenobi, who he believes is the key to destroying the Sith, is on Tatooine. So does Maul. And so Sabine picks up the Darksaber. A few episodes later, Thrawn, so in the meantime, Thrawn, a bad guy from Legends, has been introduced, and he's trying to figure out where the rebels are. He's a blue-skinned humanoid. If you don't know who, you haven't read the Thrawn books, he's a really intellectual villain. So then eventually Thrawn narrows down where their base is. And then an episode later, Sabine discovers that tries to train in Darksaber, overcoming her past, where she confesses that everything she did was her family, but she built weapons that were used against her family, so she had to stop it, but her family didn't stand with her and they left her, so she had no choice but to leave. So she decides she's going to try to unite her people to fight for the rebellion. But then they arrive, they meet her mom, who's like really mad, and she ends up fighting the Imperial ruler of Mandalore, Gar Saxon, where she defeats him, and she regains the Darksaber. She decides to stay on Mandalore. So we're also introduced to Mon. So then a few episodes later, they end up taking Mon Mothma to the space where they discover that the Empire's building TIE Defenders, TIE fighters with shields and hyperdrives, which would be really bad. So basically, they bring Mon Mothma, who unites the rebellion. And so Ezra eventually worries about Obi-Wan, so he goes off by himself and Chopper sneaking along to go and warn Obi-Wan, but he ends up revealing Obi-Wan's location to Maul, who just lured him there. And so he learns that his Maul was manipulating him and that he needed to stay with the rebels. So he returns in this chilling moment. Obi-Wan kills Maul, and then he ends up watching over Luke in a chilling moment. So then, the next episode, Sabine returns. Thrawn discovers the location of their base. He almost wipes them out, but thankfully Ezra gets Sabine and the Mandalorians' help to go and save some of the rebels. And so basically they escape, and they join forces with Mon Mothma's group on Yavin 4. And so they fight and they rescue Sabine's dad, where they discover she's created this weapon that can vaporize Mandalorians, but she ends up destroying the weapon and gives the Darksaber to Bo-Katan and becomes the ruler of Mandalore with the approval of her people. So then, after that, they meet Saw Gerrera again, and then they go on this adventure with him, and Ezra's been pushing for Lothal to be saved, but he can't get them to send resources there. So then the next episode, he ends up going with the Ghost Crew to Lothal. And they spend a few episodes discovering the new TIE Defender, and then so they get some data to the rebels, and so they commandeer this crawler, and they discover these Lothwolves, ancient creatures who are deeply connected to the Force, and they can travel across the planet in a matter of minutes. And so they end up meeting the Lothwolves, and so Ezra ends up. So Hera brings this strike on Lothal's factory to try to stop the TIE Defenders, but it fails and she's captured, and then Kanan realizes what he must do, and so he gets Ezra to lead a rescue mission, and as he ends up dying because he ends up sacrificing himself to not only save them, but also complete their mission by blowing up the fuel depot. Price, the imperial governor, was so caught up in destroying the rebels, she blew up their own refinery and halted the progress of Thrawn's TIE Defender. And she ended up helping them in completing their mission, thanks to Kanan. And so Hera's rescued, and they all deal with the loss, which is very sad. And at this point, Hera and Kanan have become a couple, and she told him she loved him. And so they're all grieving, but then they go to the temple, back to the temple that the Empire has claimed, and they discover this painting of the Mortis gods from the Clone Wars, the physical embodiments of the light, dark, and middle of the Fourth. And so they end up opening this gateway into the World Between Worlds, which is the place where Ezra had previously met Yoda. And so he discovers a pathway between time and space. So he interferes, saves Ahsoka, attempts to save Kanan, but she convinces him that he needed to honor his master's sacrifice. And so the Emperor shows up and tries to take them down and tries to enter the world, but then they escape. Ahsoka enters back into Malachor, doesn't show up until the epilogue. But then Ezra escapes back out, and then he steals the portal and collapses it in the temple. But there was a section of the temple that was missing. So in the next episode, they end up capturing, thanks to the help of the Lothwolves and some friends that Ezra has made over the years, like Rex, the other two clones, Hondo, one of Sabine's friends, Ketsu, all come to help him, and Callus. And so they all end up helping Ezra, and thanks to the Lothwolves, they capture Price, and they take down the Imperial Dome. But then Thrawn comes back, and he forces Ezra to surrender, and so by disabling the shield and bombarding the civilians. So then they get the shield back up, and then Ezra meets the Emperor, and so he ends up being shown a specter of his parents, which is so tempting for him to reunite with them, but he ends up deciding he has to let them go, and destroys that last bit of the temple. And so some of the people he left at the base, he tells them to summon the Purrgil, who come destroy Thrawn's fleet and bring him and Thrawn away to another galaxy, out of the galaxy. And so the Purrgil jump away, and so they end up defeating the Empire. They end up launching the dome, blowing it up, and then defeating the Empire and driving them from Lothal. And then they wrap up with Ezra had a kid and fought in the Battle of Endor, and Rex, and so did Rex, and Callus and Zeb went to be with the rest of the Lasats. And then Sabine stayed in Lothal, but eventually she went and go save Ezra, which is how the Ahsoka series picks up. So yeah, that's that. And so those are all 4 seasons. So another thing I loved about the show is Kanan and Hera were a couple. He was a Jedi, but it's like his love for her made him stronger, and then he showed that Jedi can have attachments and not turn to the dark side. So, and they brought in so many iconic characters like the ones I mentioned, like Thrawn, Lando, Hondo, C-3PO and R2, Mon Mothma, Ahsoka, Vader, and the Emperor. So many good, and Kanan's sacrifice was so incredible. He even got to have his sight returned right before he died, so we got to see his friends and Hera one last time. So he ended up fulfilling his promise to her before he left Malachor, that he would see her again. So beautiful. Anyway, that's all I have to say about Rebels. It's one of my absolute favorite shows. It's number 4. And so I hope I convinced you somehow to give it a chance for breaking it down. Alright, if you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, subscribe, do all that fun stuff. Send me an email at the email in the description below. I hope you have a great day. See you next time. Bye. Nope.